Hey guys, so I come to you with a tag video. This is the top 10 Unipress books tag. This tag was created by Crystal over at BiblioAtlas. She just created it today, and I thought that I would just do it because I had the afternoon off from classes, and yeah, it just sounded like a really interesting tag. Crystal is doing a sort of reading event. She's hosting a reading event of University Press books in September, where she just encourages you to read as many University Press books as possible. I think that's awesome because University Press has published so many important books and do a lot of important translations, I think. And I feel really bad that I don't think I'll be able to really participate because of ShakeTube, really, because I'll just be occupied with that. I'm reading so much Shakespeare-related stuff, and also have a buddy read and another read-along. I have a DuneTube as well. That I just have too much reading, I think, to squeeze in a University Press book. But I thought that I would do this tag because, again, I like University Press books, although I have to say, one of the things I discovered while preparing for this tag is that I don't own as many University Press books as I thought. So that was interesting. Another thing that I realized was that I haven't read as many of the University Press books that I own as I thought I did, which is unfortunate. And, you know, sort of is exactly the reason that this read-along that Crystal is doing exists. But anyway, so the idea in this tag is that you rank your top 10 favorite University Press books. That's what Crystal does. I'll leave a link to her video. She tags many people, so go see if she tagged you. I will try tag some people in the description at the end of the video, so look to see if I tagged you there. And anyway, so the thing is I can't quite do this tag the way Crystal set it forth, because I own 20 books that are University Press books, of which I have read 7. So I can't do a top 10 University Press books because I only have 7 that I've actually read. And I thought that maybe instead I would do a top 10 University Press books that I want to read. But again, it would be a bit redundant since I have 13 that I haven't read. And so doing a top 10 would just mean, you know, leaving out 3. So it's like, so what I decided to do was to just talk about the 7 books that I have read in ascending order of how much I liked them. So from least favorite to favorite. And then just talk more generally about the ones that I haven't read, and just do a quick rundown, maybe talk about a few that I'm most excited to read, and just leave it at that. One of the big themes of this, of my looking for books for this tag, is that I kind of have a thing for Oxford University Press. I didn't do the numbers, but 4 of the 7 that I have read are Oxford University Press, so I guess I have a thing for Oxford University Press. So I guess I would just get that out of the way. Also, to a lesser degree, I have some Yale University Press books. But anyway, I will just get to the books, because there are quite a few. There are 20, so it'll be interesting trying to keep my thoughts concise. But the first is Oxford University Press, and this is a part of their Oxford World Classics series. And this is Rene Descartes, A Discourse on Method. I read this a few years ago. This is obviously one of the major classics in the history of philosophy, and also in the history of psychology. This book is the major source of the Western sort of conception of the mind-body, quote-unquote, problem. So this idea that we have an immaterial mind where all our, you know, sort of cognitive faculties are, and then we have a material body, and that this problem is how does this immaterial mind and this material body connect. That had a big influence on the history of psychology, because obviously psychology is the study of the human mind and human behavior. But obviously we know now that there is no mind-body problem per se, because the mind is just made up of neurons. But the problem, it's not really a problem, it's just a question that's still being worked on, is how does the brain produce consciousness? That is the big question that sort of has taken over from the mind-body, again, quote-unquote, problem. And yeah, so that's the major sort of idea in this book that was important for me, and the main reason it's, I'm talking about it first, it's my least favorite, is just because I found it kind of dull reading. there are some philosophers who are good writers, and Rene Descartes is not one of them. This book also contains a logical, quote-unquote, proof for the existence of God, and it is one of the worst out there. There really is no, as far as I can tell, there's no real logical proof of the existence of God that is foolproof, basically. And this is just one of the worst, one of the ones that doesn't even really hold up to scrutiny for even a minute. It's this idea that, God is this perfect being, right? And we have the idea of this perfect being in our brains, or in our minds, I guess, for Descartes. He says that in order for us to have the idea of a perfect being, that perfect being must exist in order to implant that idea of a perfect being in our brains, which is just absurd. So anyway, so I don't love it. I do want to reread it soon, again, because of its importance in in the history of psychology, and because it's just always good to revisit books that you read previously that you maybe didn't like but are still sort of important. And I was a much different reader when I read it. I was a much less. I didn't read as closely then, and so I think there might be things I could get out of it on a second reading that I didn't the first time. So anyway, next is Supernatural. Death, Meaning, and the Power of the Invisible World by Clay Routledge. And this was just published in 2018, and as you can see, it's an advanced review copy. The cover of the hardcover is right there. I got this from Steve Donahue in the mail a long time ago. He sent it to me because I asked him if I could review it for Open Letters Review, and he said he would love to have me do that, and I did write a review. My review was somewhat mixed. I felt like so what this book is about the innate human need for belief in the supernatural. We are all psychologically programmed to believe in the supernatural because basically it gives our lives meaning. Belief in God, belief in angels, belief in the devil, sort of religiously oriented supernatural beings, provide us with this sense that that our lives will mean something, but also that we might be able to transcend death. Because if you're good, if you follow, the Ten Commandments, then you will go to heaven and live forever. And the reason that humans have that innate need is because we are the only species, as far as we know at least, who is aware that they will die. But like every other species, we have that innate drive to survive. And so that drive to survive and that knowledge of our own death and the meaninglessness of our lives, it causes a lot of anxiety. And so supernatural belief, especially in God and heaven and such, helps alleviate that, because we say, well, yes, our bodies might die, but we will go on living after our death. But non-religious people are susceptible to this as well. Non-religious people are much more likely to believe that aliens have visited Earth in the past, much more likely to believe in ghosts, and stuff like that. So basically, he discusses a bunch of psychological studies on this subject, about this innate need for belief in the supernatural, and a lot of the research really is fascinating. He talks about some really compelling studies in here. I think he has a really good point. However, I was critical of the book because I felt like it had a lot of blubber on it, which is kind of sad since it's so short. It's not even 200 pages. It has a lot of blubber on it. He talks about... you get the sense that he wasn't just satisfied with reporting the admittedly fascinating psychological studies. He needed to go out and hunt for all these Pew Research statistics that he thought would support his argument, and he just didn't need to. He could have just written a book about the psychological study of this stuff, and it would have been shorter, but probably better and more concentrated. And honestly, I also kind of think that this could have just been a 10-page magazine or newspaper article, for that same reason. So, I did have mixed feelings about it, but it is certainly a fascinating read, and I think an important book, an important subject, even though I don't think it got that wide of an audience, and even though it is still, a flawed book. But anyway, so yeah, that's why it's next to last. The next one is a book that has grown on me since I read it. It is Why We Need Religion by Stephen Asma, which is published by Oxford University Press. Yet again, this one, in case you didn't notice, in the big letters on the front, is also published by the Oxford University Press. And this is very similar to the Clay Routledge book. It's about Stephen Asma starts his book off with the question of why was religion evolutionarily adaptive for human beings. So religion must have occurred because it provided some evolutionary benefit to human beings. And so he goes through why it did, and you could go back to the Clay Routledge and say, well, it helps us believe that our lives have meaning, that we will transcend death and such. And Stephen Asma, I think, would agree with that. But it also does things like it provides a sort of concrete ways to mourn for people we lose in the sort of rituals surrounding death that you find in religions. They sort of religions sort of acted as a social glue. They implored parents to take good care of their children to be respectful of their parents, stuff like this, and also perhaps a bit more sinisterly encouraged people to be obedient to their leaders, which was important back in the day, but now perhaps can be seen as supporting, not great governments. But anyway, so religions were very beneficial in many ways, evolutionarily speaking. And so he just discusses the ways in which they were. This is I wrote another review of this for Open Letters, and it was kind of a mixed to negative review. There are some odd parts where he, especially towards the end, where he's talking about young men who are seduced into joining ISIS, and he does this whole weird Freudian analysis of why they do that, and that I thought was just super bizarre. There are also some points where I think his argument is not entirely foolproof. So anyway, but it's a book that's grown on me. I do think it's a good book. It's a book that I would probably give to someone if they needed sort of a primer on a sort of nuanced idea of religion as more than just a sort of delusion, as Richard Dawkins might say. So anyway, yeah. But because of those slightly mixed feelings, that's why it's, again, third from last. And now we move on to a bigger book. This is A History of the Arab Peoples by Albert Hourani. And the title tells you everything. It just starts from the founding of Islam with the life of the Prophet Muhammad and moves forward through the 20th century. It really is a great history of the Middle East and North Africa. If you're looking for an overview of the history of those regions, it really would be a great place to go. And it is published, by the way, by Harvard University Press. Anyway, this is a bit easier of a one to talk about because it's a bit more of a straightforward subject. But yeah, I would definitely recommend this as a history of the Middle East if you're looking for that. Next, we return to Oxford University Press, and we return to their Oxford World Classics. This is Samuel Johnson, The Major Works. Now, this is sort of cheating because I have not read this whole book. I have read maybe about between 200 and 300 pages of it. I've read another collection of Johnson's work in another volume that I have somewhere back here. I've read the Rasselas, The History of Rasselas, which is sort of an allegorical story about how, wealth will never bring you happiness that Johnson wrote, which was okay. But I've also read his preface to Shakespeare, which I'm actually going to be talking about in another video this weekend. I've also read his preface to the English dictionary that he did. And also I read an assortment of his essays. And I just love Samuel Johnson's prose. He just writes in this great, old-fashioned, peppery, posh English kind of prose, and I love it. I was just rereading the preface to Shakespeare this week, and it just reminded me all over again why I love his writing. He's one of the few authors where I can say that I don't really care what he's writing about. I just love his writing, so I will read almost anything by him. I love Samuel Johnson. I do want to read this whole thing eventually, so yeah. Next is a Yale University Press book, and unfortunately the cover won't tell you much. This is Absence of Mind, The Dispelling of Inwardness from the Modern Myth of the Self by Marilynne Robinson, funnily enough. And in this book, she rails against what she calls parascience. What she calls parascience. It's this idea that is prevalent, especially among popular science writers, that science is the only worthy way of acquiring knowledge about the world. Any other way of acquiring knowledge is somehow not as foolproof, not as important, and not to be trusted as much. And she criticizes that whole mentality of what we might today also call scientism, and she also criticizes a sort of modern conception of the mind. There's a sort of idea that sort of comes from Freud that we don't know what causes our behavior and our thoughts, and there are other people who can tell us what causes our behavior and our thoughts. You can sort of see that the reminiscence of that mentality to Freud's theories, and we still very much have that today. Even in my own field, in academic psychology, we still have that with us, and there is evidence for it. But she basically rails against when that mentality is taken too far. To this sort of condescension toward people that they can't think for themselves, that they need scientists to think for them or something like that. She's a big advocate for sort of doing your own thinking, reading primary sources and doing your own research and such. And I really admire her for that. So I love this book. I also need to reread it, but yeah, I can highly recommend this as a sort of polemic against some of the darker sides of modern science. And lastly, we have On Poetry by Glyn Maxwell. This was published by Harvard University Press, and this is just a really slim meditation on the writing and the reading of poetry. It's really it's kind of more of a collection of essays. I mean, I think you could read the chapters in this book in basically any order, but really it is just one of the best books on poetry that I've ever read. It's not a manual in the way that many other books, for example, Mary Oliver's book, A Poetry Handbook, are. This is a book where you will find Mary Oliver talking about sort of what is rhyme, what is alliteration, what is meter, how do you write poetry and such. Maxwell is doing a similar thing, but he's not doing it in such a sort of cut and dry way. He sort of talks more broadly and more abstractly about poetry and what it's doing before going into some more specifics of the craft of poetry and perhaps how to improve your own poetry. But this book is also about reading poetry and how to read poetry, because he himself goes through many readings of poems on his own and shows his readings of those poems to you, and those are great as well, just to sort of teach you how to read poems more deeply. So yeah, I really love this book. I actually I've read it twice. I read it last year, and then I read it at the beginning of this year. And yeah, if you like poetry, I would highly recommend it. So I have decided at the end of this video that I am going to save talking about the University Press books that I haven't read for another video, because this video has gone on for so long. So I will just edit this and post this as a discussion of the University Press books that I own that I have read, and do a separate video about the ones that I haven't read. So look out for that, and I hope you all enjoyed. If you have any thoughts on these books, as always, give me your thoughts. And I will tag a couple people, if I can think of any who might want to do this, in the description. So, yeah, anyway, talk to you later, guys. Bye.